It all started with a phone call, one that no officer ever wants to receive. A desperate voice on the other end, trembling and incoherent, whispered something so disturbing it made a veteran 911 dispatcher freeze mid-sentence. At first, the dispatcher thought it was a prank. But within minutes, emergency units were dispatched, and what they walked into had become one of the most chilling, mind-twisting cases law enforcement had ever confronted. Not just because of what was found at the scene, but because it unraveled a terrifying chain of events that would leave seasoned detectives questioning everything they thought they knew about evil. Now, before we go any further, let me ask you this. Do you think you could handle knowing the truth behind some of the most disturbing real-life crimes ever committed? Because by the end of this video, you won't just know what happened. You'll understand why these stories continue to haunt even the toughest cops to this day. So don't look away, because the answer you came here for, it's coming. And it's worse than you imagined. I want you to settle in and really lean into this journey with me, because what you're about to hear is not just a string of horrific true crime cases. This is about real people, real lives lost, real families shattered. It's about investigators who stepped into scenes so gruesome, so unexplainable, that many of them walked away permanently changed. And yet they kept going because someone had to. Someone had to make sense of the senseless. These aren't just the kind of cases you hear about in passing on the news. These are the ones that stick. The ones that made national headlines. That led to documentaries, FBI manhunts, international investigations, and psychological evaluations that left even trained professionals speechless. And if you're here because you want to understand what truly makes a crime unforgettable, what separates an ordinary murder from a case that redefines the very meaning of horror, you're in the right place. Let's get real for a second. You didn't just click on this video because you wanted background noise. You clicked because you're drawn to the darkest corners of the human mind, the same way investigators are. You want to know what pushed people over the edge, what clues police followed, what mistakes nearly let killers walk free. And maybe, just maybe, you want to know what it says about us as a society that these stories don't just shock us, they fascinate us. There's a reason stories like these dominate trending searches on YouTube, why terms like unsolved mystery, real murder cases, disturbing 911 calls, and crime scene footage keep popping up again and again. We're not just curious. We're captivated. Because deep down, there's a part of us that needs to understand how these tragedies happened so we can make sense of a world that sometimes feels like it's spiraling out of control. So let me make you a promise right now. I won't just feed you the basics. I'm going to take you behind the headlines, behind the crime scene tape, and into the very minds of the victims, the killers, and the detectives who chased them. You're going to hear about a case where a child's drawing led police to a hidden chamber that no one was supposed to find. About a woman who vanished into thin air, only for her voice to appear on a voicemail weeks after her body was discovered. About a killer so careful, so calculated, that it took 15 years and a single broken taillight to finally bring him down. And through all of it, I'm going to be right here, guiding you, walking with you, and helping you piece it all together like a real-life detective trying to make sense of the unimaginable. Let me introduce you to someone you're going to remember, Detective Maria Easton. She's not your average cop. 20 years on the force. A record number of cold cases closed. And yet there's one file that still sits unopened on the corner of her desk, sealed tight, untouched, and, according to her, cursed. No one else on the team wants to go near it. Some say it's superstition. Others say it's fear. Because the last 3 officers who tried to solve that case, one left the force entirely, another went off-grid, and the third, well, let's just say he was found somewhere no one should ever be found. And now, Maria is ready to open that file. But as you'll see, once it's opened, there's no turning back. We're going to dive into multiple cases, each one darker, more twisted than the last. These stories don't just include murder. They involve hidden cults, stolen identities, double lives, and criminals who thought they were smarter than the law. But they weren't ready for the investigators who were just as relentless as they were evil. From viral clips of chilling police interrogations to leaked courtroom footage that left jurors in tears, you'll get an inside look at the most disturbing criminal minds, The biggest FBI manhunts, the creepiest missing persons cases, and the kind of evidence that only surfaced years after the crime. Every story builds, layer by layer, drawing you deeper into a web of deception, fear, and obsession. And while each of these cases is unique, they're all connected by one thing: the moment everything changed. That split second when a cop opened the wrong door, when a suspect slipped up and said one word too many, when a piece of evidence surfaced that was never supposed to exist. That moment is what I'm going to deliver to you. You'll feel the tension in the room, you'll hear the panic in the victim's last words, and you'll understand the weight of every choice that led up to it. Because I'm not here to sensationalize these stories. I'm here to bring them to life, to honor the victims, to remind us why these cases shook entire cities, ruined lives, and still linger like a cold breath down your spine. Now, if you're the kind of viewer who thinks they've seen it all, brace yourself. Because some of what we're going to uncover hasn't even been widely reported. We'll go into audio tapes that were never released to the public, crime scene photos that were too graphic for mainstream coverage, and interviews with family members who never got their closure. These aren't dramatizations. This is raw. Real. And it will force you to question how well you really know the world around you. How well you know your neighbors, your friends, even your own family. Think about this. What if the most dangerous person you'll ever meet isn't a stranger in a dark alley, but someone sitting across from you at dinner? That's what happened in one of these stories. And when the truth came out, it didn't just destroy one life. It destroyed a community. And that's the thing about the most shocking police cases. They don't just involve horrific crimes. They expose hidden truths. Ugly ones. Ones that most people would rather ignore. But not you. You're still here. Still listening. And that tells me something. You're not just curious. You're ready to face the darkness most people turn away from. By the end of this video, you'll see just how far detectives have to go to bring justice to victims who can't speak for themselves. You'll understand the burden they carry, the lines they have to cross, and the gut instincts that sometimes make the difference between closing a case or letting a killer walk free. You'll be introduced to more key figures, like the father who uncovered his daughter's secret double life, the mother who tracked down her son's murderer using only a notebook, and the rookie cop whose very first case would be the one to ruin him forever. A twist so shocking, so out of left field, it changed the way law enforcement investigates crime to this day. And just when you think you've figured it all out, that's when you'll realize you were wrong. Because the most disturbing case police ever faced? It didn't end when the killer was caught. It only began. I won't let go of your hand. Not until we reach the end. Not until you get the answer you came for. Because the final story, the one that ties everything together, is something even the detectives didn't see coming. So, if you've made it this far, I want to personally thank you. You're not just watching a video. You're stepping into some of the darkest chapters in modern criminal history. But I promise, their stories are powerful, disturbing, and unforgettable. Detective Maria Easton had always been the kind of person who lived for the work. Not in the cliché, married to the job sort of way, but in the sense that solving crimes was the only place she felt completely in control. She didn't have much of a personal life. Never married, no kids, no family close enough to ask questions when she came home with that 1,000-yard stare. Her colleagues respected her, even feared her a little. Not because she was harsh, but because she had that thing. That instinct. The kind that couldn't be taught at the academy. The kind that could smell a lie before the suspect even opened their mouth. But lately, something had changed in her. She'd become distant, more withdrawn than usual. She stopped attending briefings, ignored texts, skipped her Friday night poker game with the rest of the unit. And the only thing sitting on her desk when she finally did show up was that file, sealed in brown paper, marked with a red sticker that read, "Restricted personnel only." The file everyone avoided like it was radioactive. And for reasons no one could quite explain, Maria had started coming in early and staying late, poring over it like it held the answer to a question she hadn't told anyone she was asking. The case itself was one most had either forgotten or deliberately chosen to block out. It was never officially closed, but it wasn't active either, floating in that purgatory where unsolved cases go to die. What set it apart wasn't just the brutality of the crime, but how deeply it shook the department. It was the kind of case that left seasoned officers sleepless and therapists overbooked. And though no one had ever said it out loud, there was a quiet understanding that anyone who got too close to it seemed to suffer for it. But Maria, for reasons she refused to explain, was back in it. All the way. She'd started retracing steps, pulling dusty evidence boxes out of storage, cross-referencing names that hadn't been spoken in over a decade. And as she did, she uncovered something no one was prepared for: connections between that old case and several more recent ones that had been treated as unrelated, random, even accidental. Car crashes that looked just a little too convenient. Overdoses that didn't match the victim's history. Suicides with no notes, no history, no warning. It was as if someone had been systematically erasing anyone who got too close to the truth. In the process of revisiting the case, Maria began contacting people who were originally interviewed and cleared. One of them was Devin Langston, a former crime scene photographer who had left the department years ago under strange circumstances. He lived off the grid now, Montana, maybe Wyoming, depending on the day you asked. When she finally tracked him down, his reaction was immediate. He refused to speak on the phone, insisted they meet in person, and when she did, he looked like a ghost of the man she remembered. Hollow eyes, twitchy movements, like he was afraid someone was watching. And before she could even ask her first question, he said something she couldn't ignore. "They're still out there. I think they're watching me. I never meant to see what I saw." But when she asked him to clarify, he went silent. And then, less than a week later, his cabin burned to the ground. No sign of him. No body found. Just ash, melted glass, and a half-charred camera with no memory card inside. Maria didn't say anything to the department. She couldn't prove it was connected. Not yet. But something inside her clicked. That camera, or what was left of it, didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a warning. And suddenly, she realized she wasn't the only one digging. Someone else was trying to cover their tracks. And they were doing a damn good job of it. As she dove deeper, she came across another name: Laura Brighton, a woman who had testified in the original case as a key witness. Back then, she was just 19, scared out of her mind, and barely able to speak through the sobs during her taped interview. Her statement had been pivotal, but vague. She'd mentioned a man with the black eyes who used to come to her family's farm when her parents weren't home. At the time, investigators thought it was a traumatic hallucination, something her mind invented to cope with the horror she'd witnessed. But now, watching the tape again, Maria noticed something she hadn't before. A look in Lara's eyes that didn't just speak of fear, it hinted at knowledge. Like she knew more than she was letting on. And when Maria tried to track her down, she discovered that Lara had legally changed her name just 2 years after the trial. No forwarding address. No social media. No job records. It was as if she'd vanished, or was helped to disappear. That's when red herrings began creeping into the investigation like shadows. There was the former detective who had been quietly dismissed after Internal Affairs opened an inquiry into evidence mismanagement, only to end up working private security for a biotech firm with deep ties to federal agencies. There was the grieving brother of one of the victims who had recently been arrested in a completely unrelated case involving a stolen hard drive, and yet, that drive just happened to contain encrypted files labeled with names from Maria's file. And then there was the anonymous email sent to Maria's private inbox. No subject line, no signature. Just a single line of text. It was never about who did it. It was about who allowed it. Every new clue pointed in a different direction. Every suspect had both a motive and an alibi. It was a web so tangled it felt like walking through smoke, impossible to grasp, impossible to escape. And the deeper Maria went, the more questions surfaced. Had the original investigation been botched or manipulated? Were these new deaths connected or just tragic coincidences? Was she chasing a real killer or being baited by someone who wanted her to look exactly where they needed her to? One thing became clear: she couldn't trust anyone. Not the old files. Not the archived reports. Not even the people she once considered allies. Because every lead she followed seemed to hit a dead end, only for another to open up in a different direction. The killer or killers seemed to always be one step ahead. Like they were watching,
Listening.
waiting, and just when Maria thought she was starting to put the pieces together, just when it seemed like she might finally crack the pattern, her apartment was broken into. Nothing stolen. Nothing moved. Except for the file. It was placed neatly on her kitchen table, open to the crime scene photo she had been avoiding since day one. The photo that had haunted her nightmares. The one with the victim's eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream, and a single word carved into her chest. He placed the envelope in a padded black case, turned to his wall of monitors, and whispered to no one, "They still think they're chasing a killer." Would you like the next part to push Maria and Daniel into working together to confront Leah's reappearance, or build tension by having Maria uncover a devastating truth about Daniel instead?
You said.
The night was colder than usual, and the wind carried with it an eerie stillness that blanketed the streets of Maria's quiet suburban neighborhood. After a call with Daniel, she couldn't sleep. She paced the living room for hours, replaying every conversation, every clue, every strange coincidence that had unfolded over the last few days. She'd dealt with violent criminals and dangerous cases before, but this was different. This wasn't just a case. It felt personal now, like someone had been slowly and methodically tightening a noose around her life, pulling from shadows she hadn't even realized existed. And the terrifying part was that whoever was orchestrating this, whoever had taken the original evidence, sent her the Polaroid of her as a child, and dragged Daniel into this, seemed to know her better than she knew herself. Just after 2 a.m., she finally sat down, exhausted and trembling. Her eyes drifted to the Polaroid again. That image haunted her. The girl she used to be, the man whose face had been violently blacked out, and that chilling message scrawled on the back. "You were there. You forgot." She tried to dig into her memory, tried to force herself to remember anything from that day. But all she felt was a hollow ache in the pit of her stomach. Like the memory wasn't just gone, it had been stolen. That was when the lights in her house flickered. Just for a second. Then they went out completely. Total silence. Total darkness. Her heart thundered in her chest as she stood slowly, reaching for the flashlight in the drawer near the entryway. The wind outside picked up, and through the slats in her blinds, she thought she saw a figure standing motionless across the street. Not moving. Not walking. Just watching. Her breath caught. She turned off the flashlight instinctively, crouched behind the couch, and peered out again, but the figure was gone. In its place, her mailbox hung open, swaying gently in the wind. Maria waited for what felt like forever before summoning the courage to step outside. Every footstep crunched too loudly on the cold pavement. She approached the mailbox slowly, heart pounding with each step, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. Inside, there was only one thing, a burnt photo. The edges were singed, the image warped, but she recognized it immediately. It was from her academy graduation. She stood in the center of the photo, flanked by two friends she hadn't spoken to in years. One of them, Bridget Lane, was now a missing persons case, unsolved for nearly a decade. Her face had been circled in red ink, over and over again. On the back of the photo, another message. "One down. How many more before you remember?" Maria's knees buckled. Her mind raced. Bridget's disappearance had never been linked to foul play. It was ruled voluntary disappearance after she walked away from her job and family. But Maria had always known something was off. And now this photo, this threat, was a direct warning. Someone wanted her to know that Bridget's case was no accident. And more horrifyingly, that Maria herself had a buried connection to it. She wasn't just investigating the wrong case. She might have been at the center of something she didn't even understand. The next morning, desperate for answers, Maria tried calling Daniel. No answer. Voicemail. She texted, emailed, nothing. By midday, she was panicking. She drove to his campus office, but his student said he hadn't shown up for class. His office was locked, his car still in the lot, but he was nowhere to be found. Maria used a side window to slip inside, needing to know if he left her any clue. The room was a mess, papers thrown everywhere, a chair overturned, and taped to his whiteboard was a newspaper clipping she hadn't seen in years. It was from a case she'd buried deep in her memory. The Stray Pines Orphanage fire, a tragedy that killed 7 children and left only one survivor. A child who was never identified, never claimed, and eventually vanished from the system. Scrawled across the top of the article in thick black marker were the words, "The fire didn't kill everyone." Maria backed away, trembling, the walls of the office closing in around her. It couldn't be. That case had been scrubbed, redacted, locked away even from internal access. She only remembered it because it had been one of the first scenes she'd ever responded to, fresh out of the academy. She hadn't thought about it in years. But now it was surfacing again. Someone was dragging her through the ghosts of her past, forcing her to revisit memories she didn't even know she had. What if she had met the orphan? What if she had helped them? Or worse, what if she was the child who had survived and simply didn't remember? Everything she believed about her past was unraveling. People around her were disappearing. The cases she thought were long closed were screaming back to life with new connections. She was being watched, controlled, and somewhere in the middle of it all, someone was waiting for her to remember. The truth wasn't just elusive, it was dangerous. And if she kept going, she knew she might not survive it. As Maria rushed out of Daniel's office, her phone buzzed again. A new video. No subject. No number. The footage was shaky, as if filmed by a hidden camera, and showed Daniel, tied to a chair, a bag over his head, inside what looked like an abandoned facility. A voice, distorted like the one from the earlier call, whispered off-screen. "You have one choice left, Maria. Remember, or lose everything." The video cut to black. Now the stakes were clear. This wasn't just about solving a case. This was about unlocking a truth someone had buried long ago, a truth that someone was willing to kill for. Would you like to continue with Maria making her next move? Maybe uncovering a horrifying truth about her childhood, or escalate with a shocking betrayal from someone close to her. Maria's hands trembled as she replayed the video for the 3rd time, scrutinizing every frame for something, anything, that could tell her where Daniel was being held. Shadows danced across the floor, an old rusted pipe hissed steam in the background, and just for a split second, she caught a glimpse of faded graffiti on the wall behind him. Her breath caught. It wasn't the graffiti that shocked her, it was what was beneath it. She enhanced the image using a program from the precinct's digital forensics lab, and there it was, a mural that used to hang in the hallway of the old Stray Pines orphanage. A mural of 7 stars, one for each child who perished in the fire. But in this video, there were 8. Everything inside her shifted in that moment. The official report said 7 children had died, but there had always been whispers about an 8th, an unregistered child who had somehow slipped through the cracks. A ghost child. A rumor. A lie buried so deep that even Maria never gave it a second thought. Until now. That 8th star wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. Someone had deliberately chosen that location. Someone who knew exactly what Maria was trying to forget. And suddenly, it wasn't just about uncovering an old tragedy. It was about Maria herself. She started to wonder, what if she wasn't just linked to the orphanage case by circumstance? What if she was that child? Her pulse pounded in her ears as she tore through her old, personal records. Adoption papers. Childhood photos. School records. It all looked legitimate on the surface. But under the scrutiny of a cop with a gut feeling and a rising dread, things started falling apart. Her birth certificate was a duplicate, not an original. Her social security number was filed in a batch from out of state, with no early childhood hospital records attached. Her first pediatric file started when she was 5 years old. And there were no photos of her before that age. Just a smiling 5-year-old Maria, adopted by a kind, middle-aged couple who'd long since passed away. For the first time in her life, Maria had to face the possibility that the life she'd built as a police officer, as a protector of others, was built on a lie. A beautiful lie designed to make her forget who she really was and maybe what she had witnessed. But then came the knock on her door. It wasn't a threat this time. It was someone she hadn't seen in nearly 20 years, Detective Alonzo Mercer, retired from the force and nearly forgotten. He had mentored her during her rookie year, taught her how to read a crime scene, how to listen between the lines of a suspect's testimony. His sudden reappearance sent chills down her spine. She didn't even have time to ask how he knew to come before he dropped the first bombshell. "You weren't supposed to remember," he said, voice low, eyes haunted. "We made sure of that. We thought we buried it. But someone dug it back up." Maria's mind reeled. "What are you talking about?" "The orphanage fire," he said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "It wasn't an accident. It was a cleanup operation. You were never meant to survive. That 8th child, that was you, Maria." The ground beneath her seemed to disappear. Mercer explained in slow, broken pieces. Back in the late 90s, Stray Pines was more than just a shelter for displaced children. It was a front for a highly confidential behavioral research program, a covert operation involving memory manipulation, government-funded psychological testing on children deemed untraceable. Maria had been one of those kids. The fire had been orchestrated when the experiment was exposed, staged as a tragic accident to wipe the evidence. The children were never meant to grow up. But Maria had survived, barely, and was quietly adopted into a new life, with every effort made to block out her past. And Mercer had been one of the operatives brought in after the fire to oversee the cover-up, to ensure that nothing came back to haunt the agency. "I tried to protect you," he muttered, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "They told us it was the only way to keep you safe. But someone else didn't forget. Someone else wants you to remember." Maria's knees buckled as she absorbed the impossible truth. Her entire career, built on justice, on uncovering the truth, was now unraveling in the face of her own hidden trauma. And the question that screamed louder than anything else was, who else knew? If Mercer had come forward now, it meant the secret was no longer safe. Someone out there was hunting her memories, someone with a purpose dark enough to kill for. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, Mercer dropped the final blow. Daniel, he was never just a friend. He was sent to monitor you. He's been working for them this whole time. But something changed. He fell in love with the real you. That's why they took him. Everything shattered. The one person she thought she could trust was the one who had been watching her, guiding her, maybe even manipulating her. But then, had he switched sides? Had he betrayed them for her? Or was that just another layer to the deception? The only way to find out was to find him before they silenced him forever. As Maria stared at the wall, eyes wide and breath stolen from her chest, the lights flickered again. Then her phone buzzed. Another video. Only this time, it wasn't Daniel. It was her. A video she had no memory of recording, standing in front of the mural, smiling, whispering something into the camera. The audio played back softly. "I know who did it. And I know why. But if you're seeing this, it means they found me first." The screen went black. Would you like to continue with Maria diving deeper into the truth about her childhood, and maybe uncovering the horrifying reason she survived, or push the story into a direct confrontation with the group behind the cover-up? Maria didn't sleep that night. The video haunted her, her own face, whispering words she couldn't remember saying, standing in front of a mural tied to the darkest chapter of her life. Every second of it confirmed what she had feared since the moment this began. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was personal. And worse, it wasn't only about Daniel's disappearance. It was about her identity, her past, her memories, and the people who had worked so hard to rewrite them. As dawn broke and the first streaks of light spilled across her living room, she made a decision. She had to confront him. Not Daniel, not Mercer, but Alex. Her partner on the force for the last 8 years. The one person left who knew her inside and out. Or so she thought. Alex had been acting strange ever since she reopened the orphanage case. He brushed off her theories as paranoia, warned her to let it go more than once. He even started deleting her case notes when she wasn't looking, saying it was for her own good, that she was spiraling. But now Maria saw it differently. She had missed the signs, blinded by loyalty. And maybe love. Alex wasn't just her partner. He was her safe place when everything else felt broken. But if he had ties to the cover-up, if he knew and said nothing, then everything between them was a lie. Still, she had to know the truth, no matter how much it might destroy her. When she stormed into the precinct, she didn't care who saw her. She marched straight to Alex's desk, slammed the printed image from the video down in front of him, and demanded answers. At first, he froze, eyes wide, caught off guard. Then came the subtle shift in his expression. Not shock, not confusion, but guilt. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I thought if I could just keep you away from it long enough, maybe they'd leave you alone." The air in the room felt like it disappeared. Maria clenched her fists, jaw tight. "You knew. This entire time you knew." "I didn't know everything," Alex replied, his voice low and desperate. "Not until recently. I was assigned to watch you back when you were still in the academy. I didn't even understand why at first. They said you were part of an old classified case, potentially unstable, that you couldn't be told the truth. But then I got to know you, and I knew they were wrong about you." She didn't want to hear any of it. Her heart was breaking, but the rage in her chest drowned it out. "So, you just lied for 8 years? You erased my files, you covered for them. You let me believe I was crazy." Alex stepped closer, eyes pleading. "Because they told me if you remembered, they'd kill you. I thought protecting you meant keeping the truth buried. But it was too late for that." The truth was already clawing its way out of the past, no matter how much anyone wanted it silenced. Maria turned to leave, but Alex grabbed her arm and said something that stopped her cold. "They gave me a choice last night," he said, trembling. "I have to bring you in by midnight, or they'll kill my sister." Her stomach twisted violently. This was the price. This was the game they were playing now, forcing her to confront the people she loved, making her question every relationship she had ever trusted. Now Alex was the one caught in the trap. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't lying. He was scared. But it didn't change the fact that he was compromised. If she stayed close to him, she risked being turned in. If she ran, she left behind the last person who might still care about her. Either way, she was losing something she couldn't afford to lose. She walked away without another word. There were no good choices left. By the time she made it back to her apartment, someone had been there. The door wasn't broken, nothing was stolen, but the photo album on her coffee table had been opened. And a single Polaroid sat on top, a picture of her as a child, sitting in a wheelchair with an oxygen mask over her face. The back of the photo had one word scrawled in red ink: "Remember." Her breath caught in her throat. The hallway behind her creaked. She turned slowly, reaching for her weapon. But no one was there. The shadows grew longer. The apartment felt colder than before. And for the first time since this began, Maria wasn't sure if she was chasing the truth, or if the truth was chasing her. Because maybe the danger wasn't only in the people around her. Maybe it was buried somewhere inside her all along. Would you like to keep escalating into Maria uncovering the truth behind the experiments and confronting the group behind them, or shift to a survival arc where she goes completely off-grid to escape capture? Maria didn't have time to think, only time to run. The hallway light flickered behind her as she bolted down the stairwell of her apartment building, heart hammering like a war drum in her chest. She had grabbed only what she could carry: her badge, her gun, a flash drive containing everything she'd uncovered, and that Polaroid. The city was wide awake outside, but Maria had never felt more alone. She thought she was chasing ghosts, fragments of a past she was manipulated into forgetting. But now it was clear, this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all of them. All the kids. All the names she didn't recognize in the footage, but who kept appearing in classified reports. Faces that had been blurred out. Lives that had vanished from public records. She wasn't just a victim of some isolated psychological experiment. She was a survivor of a program so dark, so deeply buried in the system, that even the people who were supposed to protect her weren't on it. It hit her in the gut like a punch. The real reason Alex had been planted in her life. The real reason Daniel had been eliminated. The truth was sprawling, tangled across decades, and the deeper she dug, the more horrific it became. Project Winterhold. That was the name hidden in the file she decrypted last night, hidden behind 3 layers of encryption and buried in a drive marked for archival destruction. The name meant nothing at first, but when she cross-referenced it with the old juvenile psych records, everything clicked. These weren't just files. These were blueprints for psychological reconditioning, forced identity changes, selective memory wipes. And the test subjects? Children, many taken from underfunded orphanages or unreported foster homes. Kids who wouldn't be missed. Kids like Maria. And that's when the biggest betrayal of all landed on her like a freight train. It wasn't Alex who sold her out. Not entirely. It was Mercer. Captain Mercer. The one man who always fought for her, shielded her from internal investigations, vouched for her when she broke protocol. She thought he saw something in her. She thought he believed in her. But that morning, standing across from her at the precinct, Mercer showed up on a leaked security video, escorting a trembling, drugged-up child through the halls of a defunct government facility. The timestamp on the video? 3 weeks ago. The program hadn't ended. It had evolved. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had gone to Mercer the night before, desperate, asking for protection. He told her he'd set up a safe house. Told her to meet him at a remote cabin upstate. Now she realized it wasn't for her safety. It was for her containment. She was being silenced in the same way Daniel had been. In the same way dozens of other whistleblowers had been. Her gut twisted. She trusted him. All those years he'd been grooming her for compliance, earning her loyalty, even shaping which cases she was assigned to. He didn't want her to find the truth. He wanted to bury it. And he knew exactly what buttons to push to get her to walk straight into his trap. Every instinct screamed for her to go dark, vanish, disappear into the cracks. But she couldn't, not now. There were names on that drive. Names of children who might still be out there. Names of the people funding this horror. Politicians. Psychologists. Even members of the force. If she ran, she wasn't just saving herself anymore. She was leaving those kids behind to face something even worse. Maria had uncovered a web of lies so massive, so intricate, that it reached into the very systems designed to protect the innocent. And now she had a decision to make: vanish or expose it all. As she ducked into an old warehouse outside the city limits, one of Daniel's old drop spots she remembered from when they used to run surveillance ops, her burner phone buzzed. It was a video. No sender. No subject line. Just a shaky camera, someone breathing hard, speaking through clenched teeth. "We told you to stop," the voice snarled. "This is what happens when you don't." The camera shifted, and her blood ran cold. The screen showed Alex, beaten, bruised, duct-taped to a chair. His eyes swollen shut. And behind him a wall, covered in photos. Of Maria. Childhood pictures. Surveillance stills. Her academy ID. Her first undercover case. And pinned in the center was the Polaroid she'd left behind in her apartment. They'd been watching her long before she even knew they existed. Maria dropped to her knees. The wind knocked out of her. Her entire life had been orchestrated. Every decision, every relationship, every memory. But she wasn't going to run anymore. They had tried to erase her identity, rewrite her past, and now they were coming after her future. She stared at the cracked floor beneath her and whispered to herself, more a vow than a thought. Not this time. Because if they wanted her silenced, they'd have to face the full weight of the storm she was about to unleash. And just as she rose to her feet, a creak echoed behind her. Footsteps. She wasn't alone in the warehouse. The screen fades to black. Would you like the final part to push toward a public exposure of the conspiracy with a high-stakes showdown, or dive deeper into psychological horror as Maria questions her reality even more? Rain came down in thick, cold sheets, soaking Maria as she crouched behind a half-burnt patrol car on the outskirts of the abandoned government complex. Her breath steamed in the air, chest heaving as the adrenaline pulsed through her veins. In her hand, she held the flash drive, the one Mercer had killed to protect. On it were decades of classified files, recorded sessions, project logs, and financial trails that linked the entire operation to names she recognized from TV broadcasts, government hearings, and even her own precinct's annual gala. She had the evidence, the whole truth in her hands. But now she had to survive long enough to make sure the world saw it. Across the lot stood Mercer, silhouetted beneath the collapsing steel arches of the old training facility, a gun in one hand, and a look of something far deeper than anger etched into his face. Betrayal, maybe, or the dread of knowing his house of cards was moments from crashing down. Behind him, floodlights cast eerie shadows across the building's rusted exterior. Maria could see movement inside. Other agents. Maybe survivors. Maybe more enemies. There was no telling who had flipped and who was still part of the old order. She had no backup, no radio signal, no safe house left. Only her instincts and the clarity of knowing she had finally peeled back every lie they'd layered over her past. "You were supposed to be the success story," Mercer called out through the rain, his voice carrying across the wet concrete like a judgment. "You were supposed to bury this, become the proof that the system works, that we could fix what was broken." "You didn't fix anything," Maria shouted back, stepping into the open now, soaked and shaking but fearless. "You created monsters. And when they couldn't be controlled, you erased them." Mercer lowered the gun slightly, but she didn't mistake it for surrender. He had the eyes of a man who had already justified everything, every lie, every death, every child silenced in the name of a greater cause. "We were saving lives, Maria. You think the world is ready to face what we uncovered? What we buried? You don't expose something like this, you contain it." A sharp metallic click echoed through the lot. Maria didn't flinch. Her fingers hovered over the backup transmitter strapped beneath her coat, one button press away from uploading everything to 3 independent media outlets and 2 encrypted cloud servers. She knew the moment she pushed it, there'd be no turning back. She'd be hunted, branded a traitor, but the truth would live. "You're scared," she said, stepping closer, the rain plastering her hair to her forehead. "Not of me. Not of the system collapsing. You're scared people will see the real you. That under the badge and the medals, you're the one who created this nightmare." Then came the sound that changed everything, a scream, muffled and distorted, echoing from inside the building. Maria turned instinctively, gun raised, heart frozen, and from the shadows, Alex stumbled into the light, eyes wild, clothes torn, barely conscious. Behind him, another figure emerged, a woman, tall, elegant, in a lab coat stained with old blood and ash. Dr. Eleanor Frayne, watching. And that's when Maria realized she wasn't just investigating the most shocking case police had ever faced. She was now part of it. Do you want to continue with the next section of the mystery, build an outline for upcoming scenes, or turn this into a full video script with visuals and voiceover cues? The morning after the break-in, Maria sat frozen at her kitchen table, staring at the file like it might suddenly come alive and start speaking. It wasn't just that someone had broken into her home, it was how calm and calculated the message had been. No forced entry. No mess. Nothing disturbed except for that one photograph, now resting exactly in the center of the table. Someone had been in her home. Someone who knew what she feared most. Someone who knew the case better than she did. She tried to shake the feeling off and convince herself it was a scare tactic, nothing more, but the way the word "watching" was placed in that image, perfectly aligned with the victim's cold, lifeless eyes, it felt personal. Like someone wasn't just warning her. They were taunting her. Maria rushed to the precinct and immediately requested a trace on any recent activity tied to her case number. But what she discovered left her speechless. The digital logs showed no activity. No one had accessed her files, no one had checked out the physical evidence box, and no one, according to official records, had even touched that case in over 3 years. Which meant someone was moving completely under the radar. Either someone inside the department had wiped the logs, or whoever was behind this had access to technology and connections far beyond what Maria was prepared for. That's when she did what she'd been avoiding. She called in a favor. An old contact in cyber forensics, retired but still plugged in through back channels, owed her a debt. And when she explained what had happened, his voice lowered to a whisper. "I'll look," he said carefully, "but if this is what I think it is, you need to stop. People who mess with this stuff don't get second chances." Later that night, Maria returned to the evidence room. She had a nagging suspicion that something had shifted. And she was right. The item she'd been meaning to revisit. Item number 17, a blood-stained scarf found clutched in the original victim's hand, was gone. According to the logbook, it had been signed out 6 months earlier by someone who no longer worked for the department. The signature was smudged, illegible, and worse, the corresponding digital request had been scrubbed. That scarf had DNA. Trace evidence. It was the one thing that might have helped her link the old case to the new string of deaths. And now, just like that, it was gone. It wasn't lost. It was stolen. And someone went through a lot of effort to make sure it disappeared without a trace. That night, as she sat in her car outside her apartment, debating whether she even felt safe going inside, a black SUV pulled up next to her. No plates. Windows tinted. She instinctively reached for her weapon, but before she could react, a small envelope slid through her cracked window. No words. No sound. The SUV drove off, tires quiet against the wet pavement. Maria opened the envelope and found a single photograph. It was grainy, taken from a high angle, possibly a drone or rooftop camera. The photo showed her standing in front of Devin Langston's burned cabin. Behind her, hidden in the trees, was a figure. Human. Barely visible. Watching her. But what sent chills down her spine was the timestamp on the photo, 45 minutes before she had arrived at the scene. Whoever took this photo had been watching her long before she knew she was being followed. With her trust in the department waning, Maria started working from her car, from coffee shops, from anywhere that felt disconnected from her usual patterns. She stopped answering her phone unless she recognized the number. And still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. It was during one of these nights, long after midnight, parked behind a warehouse on the outskirts of town, that she received a call from someone she hadn't heard from in years. Detective Ryan Kessler. They used to work together briefly. He'd been assigned to the original case before requesting a sudden transfer to internal affairs. No explanation. No warning. And after that, he'd fallen completely off the radar. Maria had always wondered why he disappeared, but now she was beginning to suspect he knew more than he'd let on. When she picked up, his voice was clipped, anxious, and nothing like the man she remembered. "You need to stop," Ryan said, not as a warning but as a plea. "Whatever you're chasing, it's not what you think it is. They let us think we got close before, but we never did. It was all smoke. All mirrors. They fed us the story they wanted us to believe, and we took it. I can't tell you who's behind it because I don't even know anymore. All I can tell you is this: if you keep digging, they'll bury you like they buried the others. You'll disappear without a trace, and no one will come looking." Maria pressed him, asked who they were, but the line went dead. Just static. She tried calling back, but his number was already disconnected. And when she traced the call through a burner app, it led to a payphone outside a gas station that had been closed for years. She drove out there anyway, desperate for any lead, but when she arrived, the place was deserted. Except for one thing. Sitting on the ground beneath the rusted-out payphone was a photograph, another one. This one showed Ryan, tied to a chair, a gag in his mouth, eyes wide with panic. It was dated 4 hours earlier. Maria looked around, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that someone was close, watching, maybe even filming her reaction. She was no longer just chasing a killer. She was now a piece in their game. A move being manipulated by someone who always seemed 2 steps ahead. And with every passing hour, the people she once trusted were starting to look like suspects. Including one, her own commanding officer, who had denied her access to surveillance footage from a site linked to one of the newer murders. His reason? The footage was corrupted. But Maria had seen the metadata logs. The files were intact until just 2 days ago. And only one person had admin access to delete them. It was clear now, someone inside the department was either involved or covering for someone who was. And the trail of bodies wasn't random. It was calculated. Designed to destroy every piece of evidence that could uncover the truth behind the original case. But what terrified Maria more than anything was the feeling that she was being groomed for something. Pulled along just far enough to feel like she was making progress, only to be slapped with a dead end, or a new clue designed to lure her deeper. Someone was choosing what she saw, and when. The question now wasn't just who was behind it all, but why had they chosen her? And just as she was about to leave the gas station, her phone vibrated again. No caller ID. One new message. You're not the first one they've used, but you might be the last. Would you like the next section to lead into a shocking discovery, a major twist, or a suspenseful interrogation that reveals new secrets? Just as Maria stood frozen in the glow of the gas station's flickering light, trying to make sense of the message that had just appeared on her phone, another story was quietly unfolding 20 miles across town. One that she had no idea was about to collide with her own in the most terrifying way imaginable. At a small community college in the next county over, Professor Daniel West had just ended his last evening class. He was a man whose life revolved around routine, structured lectures, morning coffee at the same diner, and quiet evenings spent grading papers. But tonight, something had changed. As he reached into his satchel to pull out his car keys, he felt a sudden chill crawl up the back of his neck. Inside the bag, beneath the stack of graded essays, was a small manila envelope. Unmarked. No name. No address. Nothing but the same eerie stillness Maria had felt when she first found the photograph in her home. He opened it slowly, and what he found inside sent his breath catching in his throat. A photo of Maria standing outside her precinct, talking to someone Daniel hadn't seen in years. Detective Ryan Kessler. Daniel stared at the image, confused, his heart thudding in his chest. He hadn't spoken to Maria in over a decade. They had dated in college, parted ways on good terms, but never stayed in touch. So, why was someone sending him photos of her? And why now? Attached to the photo with a paperclip was a small note, typed in block letters. "SHE won't find them without you." He turned the paper over, searching for anything else. Nothing. Just a date scrawled in pen at the bottom. 3 days from now. At first, he considered dismissing it as a prank, a weird coincidence, maybe even a mistake, but something about the photo gnawed at him. It wasn't just the image, it was the background, the details only someone paying close attention would catch. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken just a few hours ago, and Maria looked visibly upset in it. Ryan's face was barely visible, but from the posture and angle, it looked like he was warning her, urging her to stop whatever she was doing. Daniel hadn't spoken to either of them in years, yet suddenly, he was being pulled into something dark. And someone clearly wanted him to participate. Back at the precinct, Maria was digging deeper, chasing leads in secret, working off the grid. She couldn't risk sharing what she'd found with anyone, not even the few people she still trusted, because at this point, trust itself had become a weapon. Every time she thought she'd found someone she could lean on, something would shift. A delay in a report, a missing file, an excuse that didn't quite add up. It was like playing chess in the dark. Every move she made felt like it was already anticipated. That night, she received another anonymous file transferred to her burner phone. This time it wasn't a photo, it was a security cam clip, low resolution but just clear enough to see what mattered. The footage showed an unmarked van pulling into a warehouse parking lot, the same warehouse where one of the earlier victims had supposedly overdosed. But the timestamp on the video was from before the death was officially recorded. Hours before. In the video, 2 men dragged something out of the van, a large black bag, and disappeared through a side entrance. That bag was the exact shape and size of a human body. This evidence changed everything. The overdose report had never sat right with Maria, but she didn't have enough to question it officially. Now, someone had handed her proof that it was staged. But why? And more importantly, why help her? Was this person trying to expose the truth? Or were they manipulating the narrative to lead her down another path, only to pull the rug out from under her again? Just as she was trying to figure out what to do with the footage, her phone rang again. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. A voice, familiar, but strained, whispered her name. "Maria, it's Daniel. I think we need to talk." At first, she didn't respond. Her mind raced, trying to recall the last time she'd seen or even thought about him. And now he was calling her, out of nowhere? When he explained the photo he'd received, the note, and the mysterious date, Maria's blood ran cold. The pieces were moving faster than she could track. Someone was orchestrating this, someone who knew her past, her history, her old connections. And now they were using them to force her deeper into something she wasn't prepared to face. But Daniel's involvement wasn't the only new twist. Maria finally gained access to a series of internal reports from the department's retired cold case unit. Most of the files were standard, poorly documented, barely maintained, and long since dismissed, but one stood out. A file on a private investigator named Leah Frost, who had once worked unofficially with Ryan Kessler during the original case. The file claimed she disappeared shortly after attempting to re-interview a key witness. That witness had died 2 days later in an unsolved hit-and-run. The case was quietly shelved. No follow-up. No media coverage. Maria had never even heard Leah's name before, but her photo, paper-clipped to the corner of the file, looked hauntingly familiar. Because Maria had seen her once before. In a photograph left on her car windshield 3 days ago. In the background, out of focus, someone was watching her from a bench. That someone was Leah. Now the story had taken on a new shape. Maria wasn't chasing a killer anymore. She was chasing a puzzle that spanned years, involved people from her past, and seemed designed to destroy anyone who got too close to the truth. And Daniel, unknowingly or not, had just become a piece of it. She arranged to meet him in a public space the next day, hoping to compare notes and figure out what their connection truly meant. But she wasn't the only one watching the footage from the warehouse. In a separate office, dark and soundproofed, a man reviewed the same clip on his own screen. He watched Maria's reaction, frame by frame, a slight smirk on his face. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a second envelope identical to the one Daniel had received, and sealed it. The name on the outside read Leah Frost, the real architect behind Project Winterhold. Mercer had only been the shield. She was the brain, the beating heart of the machine. Eleanor didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her expression said everything, that Maria's presence here was no accident. That she had been guided, manipulated, allowed to reach this point. Not because she was close to the truth, but because the truth was the final experiment. The ultimate test of control. They hadn't failed to contain Maria. They'd released her, just to see if she'd come full circle. "You think you've uncovered the truth," Eleanor finally spoke, her voice calm and ice-cold beneath the storm. "But what if the truth is just another layer of the conditioning?" Maria blinked, the words hitting like a blow to the chest. Eleanor stepped forward and dropped a file at her feet, unmarked, rain sliding off its edges. Inside were photos, medical scans, psychological assessments, all bearing one name, Maria Lowell. She flipped through in disbelief. They had been watching her not just for months, but her entire life. Every memory she had, every case she thought she solved, every partner she trusted, curated, engineered, a controlled path through chaos just to see if she could rebel against the narrative they gave her. And she had. Eleanor smiled, stepping back. "Congratulations, Maria. You passed." Suddenly, the entire complex erupted with blinding white light as the generators kicked in, illuminating a perimeter lined with black SUVs and heavily armed agents, none wearing badges. "Maria Lowell, step away from the drive and place your hands on your head." A voice came through a loudspeaker, authoritative and final. "You are under investigation for national security violations and treason." Maria stood frozen, caught between Mercer's weapon, Eleanor's revelation, and the faceless voice of authority. She could feel the world closing in, but somewhere deep inside, a different emotion flared. Clarity. All this time, they had tried to rewrite her. But she wasn't their subject anymore. She was the last variable they couldn't control. She turned, slowly lifted her hand, and pressed the transmitter. Somewhere, far beyond the darkness of that compound, the truth began to spread. But as the agents swarmed, as Mercer rushed to stop her, as Eleanor vanished into the chaos, Maria looked up and saw one final twist she never expected. The photo pinned to the inside of Eleanor's jacket wasn't of Maria. It was of another girl,
Same eyes.
Same face. Slightly younger. And beneath the image, one word in red ink. Prototype. The screen fades to black, and the story you thought you knew fractures completely. Want me to craft the ending and epilogue next? Weeks passed since the facility burned. Not in a fiery explosion of cinematic justice, but in a quiet, controlled demolition, signed off with government seals and buried beneath layers of bureaucratic silence. There were no headlines, no breaking news, no midnight testimonies or viral leaks that shook the nation. Because before the truth could spread, before the world could demand answers, another narrative had already been written. A different Maria was interviewed by a trusted news anchor, a hero cop who stopped a rogue faction inside an outdated intelligence division. The footage was deep-faked to perfection, the voice carefully replicated, and the media swallowed the performance whole. The real Maria, bruised, scarred, and still grappling with who she really was, watched from a rundown motel off Highway 89, clutching a burner phone and a thumb drive with the only untampered copy of the original files. The world had chosen its lie, but the truth still breathed. Quietly, patiently, she had fled through the mountains that night, helped by a faceless man with a crooked smile who said he owed her mother a favor.
She didn't ask.
Not then. Maybe she never would. What mattered was that somewhere in the chaos, Alex had escaped too, though he hadn't spoken a word since. He stared into space, haunted by something no file could explain. And Maria? She spent each day digging through the drive, not just to expose the past, but to learn where her own story truly began. Every entry led her deeper. Into labs with no names. Into field reports describing children recalled from failed tests. Into whispers of an organization even Eleanor feared. What frightened her most wasn't what they had done to her, but how close they had come to succeeding. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the realization that she had never really lived her life on her own terms. It was wondering if any of the emotions she had felt, love, grief, guilt, rage, had ever been real, or if they were just programmed responses. But in those late, sleepless hours, Maria began to understand something deeper. Even if they had written her code, they couldn't predict her choices. The moment she defied the script and exposed what they buried, she became something they couldn't define. Not a prototype, not a project, but a person. Still, the world moved on unaware. The headlines returned to political scandals, celebrity divorces, and viral hoaxes. No one asked why Mercer's body was never recovered, or why surveillance records of the compound mysteriously vanished days later. No one cared when a high-ranking senator quietly retired after years of silence. But Maria remembered. She knew this wasn't over. She'd tasted too much of the machine to believe it could be taken down in one broadcast or one viral leak. No, if she wanted to end this, truly end it, she would need to dismantle it piece by piece. From the inside out. On a cold November morning, she stepped onto a train bound for D.C., Alex beside her, a new identity etched onto her license, and a backpack filled with names, scientists, funders, agents still active. Somewhere among them was the woman from the photo, the girl they called the prototype. If Maria had a sister, real or manufactured, she needed to know. Not just for herself, but because if there was still one more like her out there, there was still hope. Not everything they built had to be corrupted. Maybe, just maybe, someone else could choose their own path too. As the train pulled away, she glanced out the window, catching her reflection. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She looked human. Not perfect. Not programmed. But real. And somewhere, in a hidden room lined with screens, an old program flickered back to life. A line of code reactivated. A voice quietly asked, "Subject, Lowell. Status." And from the dark, a reply came. "Active." Just like that, the story ends, but the mystery doesn't. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all. Would you like me to write a teaser for a possible sequel next?